Hey, watercolor class. So this demonstration is in support of our assignment to create a portrait of a person or an object or creature of some kind. I've got a couple examples that I'm going to work on here. One is of an owl, a little figurine of an owl. It's like a decoy, you know, that we keep in the garden to scare away squirrels, and all they do is just push it off the fence and, you know, where we place it. But anyway, it's an interesting form to look at. Got some nice dimensionality. So want to demonstrate on that. And then the other aspect of this demonstration, I'll show a little bit of work working on this portrait as well, portrait of a man's face. Try to go full object though, you know, as opposed to just details or fragments. Try to get the whole thing in there this time. So predominantly the demonstration will focus on this, and then I will do a little follow-up with some embellishment on this particular image. So we're working primarily with two colors. I'd like you to try that, and then consider that you can come back in the end and elaborate with maybe some color accents, more wide-ranging colors, just for, you know, additional visual interest. But see if you can get the bulk of it done in a couple of colors, essentially like contrasting colors or complementary colors. So I'm working with a maroon color. Sorry, this is not maroon at all. An aqua color, cerulean blue, and then I'm working with a brown. You know, so orange would be kind of the root of that, and obviously this is the blue. So these are very, very distinctly opposite though in terms of the spectrum. So I'm just trying to work with that, and then working also with this technique that we looked at a little bit in the technique overview, which is dry brush. So far I've done a pencil gesture drawing to kind of get proportions, and that's where you can figure things out and make corrections and so on. And then I basically, following that, I got some paint on my brush and just did a linear drawing with the brush over the top of the pencil so that it would stand out. But I'm going to try to incorporate line a little bit more into this painting because I feel like the image itself supports line, and line is kind of a quicker way to sort of build form. You know, you can use line to describe edges and so on. You don't have to make it as much as three-dimensional. So I'm doing that just as a quicker way. Then the other thing I'm working on is dry brush. So with dry brush, remember, kind of using the edge of the brush and just a little bit of paint on there. Not a super liquidy brush, but using the edge of the brush to kind of build up volume, dimensionality. So I'm taking this lines that I did, and then mixing the colors together. And then I'm kind of doing sort of a shadow around the lines that I made. And I feel like that'll kind of help create some dimensionality. Kind of get a little bit of 3D quality into the image. And I feel like that's just going to help me down the road a little bit. Sometimes the brush gets so dry, then it becomes frustrating. But I'm alternating pretty much between these kind of brownish tones and bluish tones, and not worrying too much about it. They just sort of correct one another. So this technique is good for fuzzy things, furry things. You know, you can kind of see how it's just, it can add up to this kind of more feathery quality, I suppose. And as I'm going, I'm kind of making corrections. And I'm also embellishing, you know, there are certain things that aren't actually on this, you know, yard ornament thing. But so little shadows around the areas that have outlines. And these become, they're like, you know, they're like sort of like washes, but I'm doing them with a dry brush so they pick up the texture surface of the paper. I'm just going to try to build those things up. And then later on, you know, I can add, this kind of gives me my, you know, my structural stuff. Then later on, I can add glazes of color that will perhaps make it a little more visually interesting, just a little more, you know, visual eccentricity. And there's a base here, so there's like a surface plane, flat surface plane, like he's sitting on top of a log or something. And then I'm doing the vertical surfaces of that now. And then it's perched here, so I'm doing a little shadow around the foot, and the clawed foot. Not worrying too much about whether it's brown or whether it's blue, blue-gray. Although since it's the foot, I think I'll make it more brown, kind of a warmer tone. It's good to let, you know, it's good to let the colors be more saturated or more specific sometimes, you know, like here's, this is more blue, this is more brown. So that's, so my volume is starting to, you know, starting to feel more dimensional. That's good. And then I'm going to continue kind of shading with these wet into wet washes where the feathers are. Kind of thinking about it being, you know, kind of the underside of everything, the underside of the eyes, the underside of the feathers. That's where the darker shading is, assuming there's light coming from above. It's just kind of a good general principle to kind of consider where the light's coming from. And your image will indicate to you what that is, whatever your source is. If you're looking at whatever you're looking at, there will be visual clues as to where the light's coming from. And in this case, light is kind of coming this direction. So kind of the underside of all of these surface planes. All right. And you're always making adjustments. So when, you know, one area gets darker, then you have to darken another area. So this became darker. So I needed to darken this area here, just to show more depth, more dimensionality. Just so that my form can continue to stand out. This side is making it a little bit darker because, you know, assuming the light's coming from here, this might have a darker shade to it. Okay. And you're moving your way through the picture. So I worked a while here, and I want to go back and work a while here. And this surface plane, give it a very light tone. Light, we're going to make more of a wash along the surface here. So this is, here's the edge of the vertical, and like this is a horizontal plane, this is a vertical plane, so I want to define this edge. So I'll make it a little darker here. There, that's starting to come out. Now I'm standing up right now working. That's kind of up to the individual, what the most comfortable position for working is. Ultimately, what you want is just a viewpoint where you can see your paper, you can see what you're working on. If it's too, if you're too perpendicular to it, in other words, if this is your surface plane and here's you, it's harder to see. You want to be kind of parallel looking down. So just get at a vantage point where you can really see. The other thing I've done is I tilted my surface up. That's why there's distortion on the screen. That's why it looks kind of not perfectly parallel edges. That's because I've tilted this end up. Therefore, I can see it better. And if I were using, wet paint, then it tends to sort of settle more evenly. Gravity's pulling it down. So that's something to also consider when you're working. Just find a comfortable spot, comfortable position, and then just make sure you have a decent vantage point on it. Still using this dry brush. I'm preserving the heavier outlines for heavier marks, at least for now, for this contour here, just because I wanted to be kind of contained as a overall silhouetted form. That allows me to have less detail in the actual object. So just trying to follow through with these soft highlighting and shadows. Soft shadows, actually. Just being consistent with the direction of the light. Felt like it needed more blue in there, so I just came back and got some blue. The object itself is kind of a non-color, so kind of a gray. So I'm making I'm making a more interesting gray by using blue and brown to make that impression of gray. Now the plan is, in the end, too, to kind of glaze over areas of this, just to kind of, solidify it. So that'll be these big, more expansive washes of color to kind of just, cement the continuity of everything. And so you'll see how that's done. And the biggest thing is to have patience. As a teacher, as an artist, I have tons of patience. As a teacher, I feel impatient with myself because I feel like the image has to kind of unfold, has to just be something instantly, because I don't want to waste the student's time. but this, it's not. It just takes time, and I guess that's the thing to keep being aware of. It just takes time to build an image. So every once in a while, I cut away a little bit just to spare everyone having to watch so much of this. But the real, progress comes with just sticking with it and kind of continuing to adjust and making these little, little changes, little embellishments, building on everything. And that really unfolds over time. There's no other way around it. I wish there were. And I'm trying to show a more notational way of making this. Notational meaning kind of shorthand. Just how can we do this quickly? So this is, I guess, as quick as I can be. There, that beak is starting to come out. I need to have like a darker mark there, but I'm kind of happy with that. Make a mark there, then I need to make a mark there. I might eventually go to even a darker color to emphasize some of these areas. The advantage of working with just a couple complementary tones is that you can move around more easily. You don't have to stop and think, how did I mix that color? You're just kind of working with the same color vocabulary, and so you just kind of move around with the same colors on your brush. And the fact that you're continue to overlay, then they become integrated. The blue becomes integrated with the brown. There. This is like a little spur on there. on their foot. So I'm taking the opportunity to stand back periodically just to see what I got, what I have. And I feel like I'm getting some decent volume. You know, it just looks more, the L just looks more solid. So that's good. And now I want to put some more intentional marks. And I'm introducing a new color. I'm introducing the Payne's Gray into the mix to give myself some darker values to work with. Especially over here. I want the eyeballs to stand out a little bit more. I wish I hadn't have done that. I'm going to try to remove what I just did. There. And then you know, you just never know. If you got it right or not. Ultimately, sometimes it just takes time to look, to step away and work on something else for a period of time, and then come back to see. Trying to emphasize the beak a little bit more. I just have this routine of dipping the water, dipping the brush and blotting it just to maintain some kind of consistency there. Because I want, you know, sometimes I blot a lot, sometimes I blot a little, but blotting the brush before you add to the paper gives you a little bit more control in terms of what's going to go on. It can be very frustrating sometimes if you've got too much liquid or pigment on the brush, and then you touch it down to the paper and it just goes all up, goes everywhere. You don't want that to happen. what I'm doing is just trying to really bring out the sculptural quality of this the eyes, the planes around the eyes. Okay. That's getting about as far as I can really take it on one level, I guess, without really looking at it, considering it for a while. But that doesn't make for very good filmmaking. So just going to try to get it to a state where I feel like, you know, this is presentable. Trying to add a little more weight to this side. And I'm doing these accent marks with the brush too. And in the end, the plan still is to put on some kind of a wash that will kind of emphasize certain areas that I want to have more more visual dominance. I'm trying to, these lines I'm using, I'm trying to build them up a little bit so they don't just, they still feel, that they're building on the dimensionality of the thing. It was just one big flat outline, then that can kind of kill the dimensionality. So I'm hesitant to put anything too dark on this side because that will flatten. But I do want to kind of emphasize the edge a little bit. So it's kind of it's just a line that's building on some of the lines that are already there. But it's not darkest line. And lines kind of help to imply movement too. All right. One more little wash over here. Okay. I see little tiny things that I might want to continue to correct. But essentially, I'm getting rid, for instance, I'm getting rid of, you know, I don't, my white, I want to be over here. All the highlights, I don't want it to be on this side, just kind of curving away from the major light source. So I'm kind of eliminating those right now. I'm assuming this would be in shadow. A little darker markings over there. Okay. There, now I'm just going to look at it for a little while and then decide what the next kind of approach should be. But like I said, I want to create some, I want to do a glazing over it so as to bring out more color and bring out more visual interest. So I'm gonna, I predominantly made it with these two colors, the brown and the blue, mixing together to create neutrals. Now I want to just add a little bit more color for the sake of embellishment. So I'm just going to consider what that might be. And I'm thinking in the orange, the orange kind of relates to the brown. It's the, orange is the root of brown. So maybe if I bring out more orange in the image, it could be interesting. So I might try to do that. Just consider that for a bit. Okay, so I finished embellishing this with, with the neutral wash, neutral colors, brown mixed with blue. And what I did, I just kind of just adjusted a little bit, which is kind of a tedious process, but making sure that the light seemed consistent, kind of going in and eliminating white where I knew there had to be a shadow. So then that helped with dimensionality. And then I added a little bit of texture to the surface because I felt like the surface was somewhat monotonous. So I added some texture in these little kind of downy, feathery type things. So now I'm ready to add final embellishments. And I had said orange because that's the root of the brown. So I think I'm going to add some orange into it. And then also I'm going to intensify the impression of the blue. So there, you can see the blue in there. I think I want to go back and add more blue. So this is a predominantly kind of gray figurine, but I just want to animate it a little bit and make it more interesting from a coloristic standpoint. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to do some glazing. So I've already got the dimensionality figured out. So I just want to kind of glaze in some color just to make it more interesting. There's always the possibility that it won't be more interesting, but you don't know until you try. So I'm glazing into the shadows. There's areas that are already dark. I think that's probably a better way to go than to glaze onto the highlighted areas because that could undermine all that kind of dimensionality you've been working to get. Okay, so there's a blue. Let's see how that holds up. And then the other thing I wanted to do was orange, kind of going maybe orange around the head. And I have an idea for one final embellishment. I have to make an orange. I don't have an orange on my palette. I have a red orange. I have an earthy orange. I'm going to go for a more dramatic orange. There. So maybe just kind of in here, just literally glazing over what's already there. Maybe leaving a few little highlights visible. But I'm not undermining all the trouble I took to, make all those marks and textures. I'm just trying to embellish it with a little color. Pick up on them. There, okay. It's fun. I feel like it needs to be on this little space around the eye as well. So here goes. Yeah, that helps. This is a little weak right now, so I just have to make it more intentional. So I have to paint it as if I mean it. There, I like that. All right. And you leave a little rim of little highlight there. So that'll sell a little bit. And I feel like I can't do just one eye, do the other. Okay, glazing in color. So my form's still there. I haven't wrecked it. I've just kind of added kind of tone to color into it. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to try, and there's always a chance you might have to come back and embellish. And then the other thing I wanted to try was to glaze in some color in the beak. I'm going to do a yellow orange in the beak. And in the side where there's the shadow. And we'll see how, I think it's going to settle a little bit so that it'll get somewhat dark again, but it'll just have a kind of a little bit more color to it. And then finally the eyes, I'll make them really yellow. Leaving a highlight too. And the last thing I want to do is make a little slit in the eye. Prior to this, they've been just kind of like little buttons as they are, but I want to just add something, make them look more like real owl eyes. This is settling a little bit. Potentially I can layer a wash over that again. You can see how this is kind of settling. And one final kind of mark in these two spaces. Gotta let it dry. All right, now I'm just adding a little slit. And the deeper you go, of course, the more adjustments you have to make. I might want to fool that. Still a tad wet. And because I added such a dark here, I want to go and make more dark elsewhere. There, that's the general idea. Just see what you can bring to it by adding maybe a flourish of color here or there, just to enliven the image. I'm making a little bit of a coarse shadow here on the beak. Just to make that light dark contrast a little more apparent. There. Okay. Now we'll look at the human portrait briefly and see what can happen with that. Okay, now with this portrait, which you saw me begin in one of the earlier sessions, just with, just washes and so on. It's a slightly different approach. Here, we're not doing dry brush, although one could do dry brush with a portrait, but we're doing more of a wet into wet kind of process, and also dissolving paint once it's put on the surface. You can put down a mark. Here, I'll show the example. You put down a mark, and it could stay there for a period of time, or when you put it down, you can also come back, clean your brush, come back, kind of just dissolve it. So there's a softness to part of it. And this is something, this is something we've looked at already a little bit. But in terms of the kind of softness, the softness of the features on the face, sometimes this is it's to your advantage to have like sharp lines, hard lines, and then softer lines, where you just go back and kind of dissolve the paint a little bit. I'll show an example here on the right here on the border, the contour of the face. Make a really dark line, and it's really strong kind of outline, which isn't exactly what I want. I want a softer kind of blended look. I'm going to make this edge pretty sharp. I'm putting some, the two colors I'm working with here are a kind of an earthy red ochre and then a Payne's gray. So I put down a red ochre and then I dropped a little Payne's gray into it. Obviously that's really strong. So I want to just dissolve that edge a little bit. And that will maybe show more of a kind of roundness to this gentleman's cheek. That's the same thing I did over here. And just letting that, where the paint crystallizes a little bit, letting it do that on to create the edge. And then, you know, I can do that some areas I don't have to do it, but that kind of brings dimensionality into this guy's features. Other, you know, where there's a wrinkle and it sort of appears and disappears, same kind of process. Now I want the cheeks here to be, you know, I want the cheeks to feel somewhat curvy. So I'll go along this edge here. This time I'm going to use more of the ochre tone. Make a mark like that. And then again, dissolve it so that it just has a softer edge to it. I'm going to suggest if you're doing people portraits too, you know, don't do a baby with the most delicate features and delicate skin. Do someone who's got some mileage on them, and then there's much more to kind of keep you engaged with there, because there's almost nothing to the face of the baby. They haven't lived long enough, you know, so there's nothing there. And the features are just so delicate with, you know, someone who's got some lines and some wrinkles and so on. You can do a lot more. You can really try out your methodology and not feel like you're kind of destroying the likeness of the individual. Like with this guy, the more that's done, probably the more real or the better likeness I get. Okay, so there's a shadow here and one kind of here. And I'm just using these two colors, just kind of, you know, going back and forth between the two. And then just kind of dissolving the marks. You don't always have to do that, but you know, when you want more clarity, then of course you make a sharper edge. But I'm just kind of building up, slowly building up form just through this process. If the mark is too strong, you know, I just kind of manipulate a little bit. But see how that I'm slowly getting this sort of, I'm doing these kind of contouring of the cheeks, contouring of the nose, where it's like white, then a lighter wash and a darker wash and a darker wash, and sort of contouring the round quality of his nose. Okay, now for the eye sockets, and we're mirroring the shape in the skull. I'm going to put in pretty dark stroke here. And I will manipulate it by kind of dissolving part of it. Do a few things at a time, you know. You get that heavy line across the top of the eyelid. Now I'm going to dissolve this a little bit, and then I'll come back and build onto that. But I need that general impression of there being kind of dark where the skin's kind of gathering. It's very irregular because of the folds in the skin, you know, it's sort of soft and then it's hard, and then it's soft. The edge is soft and it's hard. Sure. And it's really kind of a repeat process over and over. And you just, you just do this over a number of times. Each time you try to influence it a little bit more to where you want it to be, assuming you can't get it there the very first round. You have to just build it up. That's a difficult concept for maybe people are just starting out, the idea that it can't be exactly what you want right at first. It's like you got to build the architecture for the form, and that just requires, a little bit of a leap of faith. Imagine blurring your eyes a little bit and then slowly bringing them into focus. That's the same thing you're doing with the painting process. You're starting out with kind of a blurred vision, it's basically just this kind of structural representation of what you want, but it doesn't necessarily have all the details yet. You have to build a foundation for the details, or else they really don't mean anything. The details, if they're on top of nothing, they just don't mean anything. Starting out some eyebrows. Just trying to show, same with the eyebrows. Look, you see the individual hairs. They're there and then they're not. And so that's kind of what you have to represent. Sometimes they're clear, sometimes they're not. So that's what I'm trying to show with the brush. And most importantly, that overall shape. I'm standing up, by the way, so I'm just kind of moving around. If you hear the shuffling noises, that's just me moving around on my creaky wood floor. So now I can go back in and maybe place a couple more marks in these areas in the eye. And I think I mentioned this with the painting in the owl. You make one mark one place, and then that changes everything. So then you got to go back and fix it elsewhere. Adjust, I should say, not fix, just adjust. There, so really just trying to get a sense of those folds of skin just kind of appearing, disappearing. And it's through this process of just laying down, here, do another one, lay down a little wash, and then dissolve it a little bit. And typically, too, if you emphasize the lid, the top lid, that's true of people that are older and people that are younger. Emphasize the top of the lid. The lower lid doesn't necessarily stand out so much. Now, adding a little bit of tone to the lip. And you can dissolve color, even if it's been on there a while. I was dissolving a little bit, like right here, lifting, remember lifting. So I'm lifting out a little color just to clarify that crease on the lips. Lifting out a little color here. There, just to make it softer. I want to make the nostrils more clear. So I'm going to go, here's a question, do I go on the inside or the outside of the nostril? What is it that has the shadow? I'm going to do I can actually do the inside of the nostril. And then, so I have that edge. And that's not bad. I just want it softer. So I'm just going to dissolve it like I've been doing. There. So that'll settle a little bit. And then if I have to clarify that, I will. And then the other thing I want to do is create more depth. The nose. A little shadow there. And dissolve this a little bit. See what happens. And now I'm going to do over here. This nostril is less defined in the photograph, so I might just leave it somewhat that way. But one thing I want to do over here is there's this kind of triangular shape. I want to indicate that, so I have to go to make a mark, something like that. And then I'll just let it softening the mark a little bit. So I use a more intense ochre in that time. It shouldn't be as dramatic when it dries. Cooling it down a little bit. Okay. The plan is to bring more intense color like that into the picture anyway. Okay, so for the purposes of the demonstration, I think we're getting to the point where we can play around with with a little more intentional glazing. So the first thing I want to do, I want to make this person's eyes hazel, just to separate them a little bit. And this, once I make the eyes hazel, then this skin will start to look really like full color. It'll look like a full color image. Once I just add just a little bit something out of this very strict, warm and cool, or brown, a dark brown and earthy brown, and then kind of a blue-gray color. So what I'm going to do is mix a green, kind of a greenish tone. And with these eyes, what I've done, same thing of, that I've been demonstrating. I made a mark, I made kind of a circle, and then I went back and I lifted kind of like this, dissolve the paint a little bit, lifted, and that's what makes the eyes start to look round, is that soft. I'm lifting a little bit on the pupil to make it look more. So it gets a kind of organic edge to it. And you've noticed, the irises tend to be somewhat outlined. Like that. And if you ever looked at hazel eyes before, hazel colored eyes, they have brown in them. They have brown and they have green. And then that's what makes that hazel. So I'm setting the stage. Okay. It's looking pretty good. And my paint dried here, and then I lost my mark. Now I'm more confident now, and so I'm kind of building that more deliberately. There. Okay, now hazel. So I'm making an olive, kind of an olive green. So I'm taking a green and I'm mixing it with a brown. That will give me an earthy green. There, so a little more red in there. Red brown. I'm just gonna glaze that color in. I might make it more deliberately green because there's already kind of a brown underpainting there. Leaving a highlight. And I'm dissolving the hazel a little bit too, just to get that translucency in the iris and the lens there. There. So suddenly that really brings this whole thing into a more full color range. And why are we calling it glazing? Well, because you're kind of glazing color into these tones that you've already built up to create the architecture. So you're just glazing in color just to influence it a little bit. But see how that reads like hazel? So you see both blue and brown in there because of the underpainting. Really want to emphasize this notion of underpainting. Sometimes it's just a very direct mark, but very often you build it up. You know, that's most likely you're going to have to build it up over a repeated sort of series of strokes and mark making until you get to the point, until it gets to the point where it needs to be. Now I'm going to have some fun with the lips. I'm going to bring somewhat exaggerated red into this lip. So we've already got that nice dark tone. Now it goes on and it's scary, you know, you think, oh, it's like lipstick, but when it dries, it's going to pick up. It's going to be influenced by whatever color is underneath it. So just give it a minute. Now I'm going to do a more subtle kind of pink on the lower lip. This is what in the old days in TV, this is what the Turner Network used to do to old black and white movies. They would colorize them by just taking those original negatives, black and white negatives, and then they would just subtly tint color into them. And in our process, is kind of what we call it, it's glazing. But with that little bit of orange here, and then that kind of more red, saturated red in the upper lip, you can see it's just kind of giving the lips a little bit more color. And now if I want, I'm going to clean my palette a little bit. Got a lot of different colors on there now. And this is what I want you guys to do. It's just kind of, again, use just maybe a couple colors to do your basic architecture with, and then you know, come back in, and it would be into the shadow areas. Not, you know, you don't want to lose your highlights. You want to, if you're going to have a bright color in the highlight, you're going to have evidence of that color in the shadow too. All right, so now what you can do is glaze in color. I'm going to be very cavalier about this. Just go right over areas that I've already painted. And believe it or not, it'll help to just clarify what I'm doing. And this may not be the end point, but it's helping me get there. Very, very wet, very, very kind of fluid. You guys to feel comfortable doing that. And, you know, dissolving that a little bit as I go. This may require adjustment too. And hopefully, you know, it really does coagulate in certain, or I mean, you know, that color will really gather in certain areas. You know, and you know, and I may still want to come back and play with certain things, but this is good. Last area that needs to be dealt with is the nose. And it's always the scariest part. I would say more so than the mouth. Notice I use this big floppy brush. It keeps me from being too obsessive. There, that really totally made the difference to bring that tone into the nose. And you see, I basically followed the structure that I had set up, you know, not making new dimensions. I'm just reinforcing the ones that are already there. And then finally, got to have a core shadow in there in the nose. The little adjustments that you make, you know, they're maybe right at the end. But here, we need to have a core shadow right here, you know, right here on the tip of the nose. So I'm going to pick out, go back to my original color scheme and pick out kind of a cool brown. And I have a little bit of an indicator where it should be. Right here. There. So scary to make that, but I think I'm going to be happy with it. I'm adjusting a little bit. I'm going to get a core of the core shadow too, with an even darker mark. One thing I'm doing that you can't see off camera, so I'm moving around. The picture's, you know, staying in one place, but I'm moving around the picture to get, you know, a better, you know, like I can make a mark if I'm over here, sometimes better, or I can make a mark if I'm over here, sometimes better. So I'm just kind of moving around. There. And there's, you know, one could keep going, but, you know, this is, you know, this certainly conveys who it is, you know, conveys enough about the form where, you know, you're not, you know, the viewer's not going to question. It doesn't seem half made, you know, it gives enough information about the subject and about the proportions of the subject, that, you know, you can keep going with details, but it gives enough information. And then finally, you know, these little marks. And I'm getting more emboldened, of course, with these final strokes to use more deliberate color. I really want those eyes. I want those eyes to really go back in the socket. So I'm putting some dark marks in there. I have to kind of trust these darker marks I'm making now. I have to kind of trust. If I keep wiping them away, I'm not going to get to the end point. So I have to, at some point, I have to just trust that it's okay. They will kind of even out as they dry. And then the last thing are some of those crazy eyebrows. That's one of the indignities of aging, is that your eyebrows get all bristly and they fall out at the same time. but they're fun to paint. Just trying to create some kind of patterns. And that's pretty much it. Okay.